Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Abarca with Andy Lipson and our friends Derrlyn, Tom, and Bruce. Neuburger. Thank you. I wish his last name was a little easier.
Well, at least you didn't have to spell it. Everybody's spelling it.
Sorry. Oh, God.
We're so professional.
Butchering. Gracias por estar aquí. A los dos. Today we will be discussing Derrlyn and Bruce's time in at the border and visiting the refugee shelters
In El Paso, Texas.
In El Paso, Texas. Thank you very much for being here and for having the time to discuss this, because we have a lot to cover, and I really am interested. I'm sure we're both really interested in making sure that we get your experience really told to our audience.
Because we've had several episodes about immigration, about open borders, and all that kind of stuff. So this would be a real good addition to that.
Yeah. So let's just start with a brief background on both of you. We know about Bruce. We had Bruce on before, and maybe just briefly give us something about yourselves.
Derrlyn?
No, go ahead.
Well, okay, so in terms of this, I went to the border in El Paso. It was a trip originally organized or promoted by Unitarian College of Social Justice. I got an email from someone, and I put it out to other people, and someone that I know from the Unitarian Church here in San Francisco decided she wanted to go, and I decided I'd go with her. And that was back in December. And it was an incredible experience, which we'll talk somewhat about. And then we kind of decided that we wanted to go back for a number of different reasons, which I can talk about later. And we went back in March. And I had spoken to people here about it. And I don't know, Derrlyn, if you were influenced by what I said, but on Derrlyn, she introduced herself, but Derrlyn also went there to El Paso recently.
Because that's what you asked, right? A brief introduction?
Yeah, just introduction about yourselves first,
So-
and then we'll get into your experience.
So my name is Derrlyn, Tom. I teach at Mission High School. I've been in the San Francisco Unified District for about 24 years. Yeah, that's it.
So, you said that you went to El Paso, and did you invite Derrlyn? How did you guys come up with the idea of going together? What was your intention, or how did you both come up with this idea to do what, or to witness? Please tell us about your experience. How did this come about?
Let me just say real briefly the reason I went. I have been involved in the issue of immigration, as all of us to some degree are. And I really wanted to be on the ground at the border, connected with people coming from across the border. All the talk about the caravans and all the propaganda that's been used by the regime in power. And I've spoken a lot about it, I've read a lot about it, I've talked to people about it. But I really wanted to have personal, direct experience with people, refugees coming. I really just, and this opportunity came up, and so I was happy to see that I had the opportunity to do that, and I got a lot out of it. And I found out in the course of that an awful lot of people were interested in the experience. A lot of people asked me about it and invited me to come and speak about it and that sort of thing.
I just want to
Well, I want to about Derrlyn,
Yeah.
about you, in terms
Yeah.
of why you decided to go.
So I think also just in regards to the caravanas that were coming, and how people were extremely desperate, I use that word in the sense that they were forced out from their home countries in Central America. And I teach so many students that are from Central America, and their journey and what they've shared with me made me realize that the kind of work that really, or the need, was at the border. I went to the California border first, hoping that the caravana would be there at that time, but they weren't. So when Bruce had told me about going to Texas, at first I was reluctant, but then I realized if that is where so many of these families are coming and entering and actually coming across, then yeah, that would be a good time to go. I went at a different time because I teach, so I had to go I was only able to go during my spring break for a week. But it was a very life-changing experience for sure.
You teach at Mission High School with Andy Lipson, and a predominantly, I don't know if it's today because it's been changing the demographics and people are being pushed out of San Francisco, but you teach, I would still think that in a predominantly Latino, 90% Latino population, not anymore?
It's reduced, it's half, it's about half, 50%,
Right.
little over 50% right now.
And I just want to point out, you two are very long-time activists, and I that's why you two have this experience that is really crucial for us to share with. That's all I just wanted to say earlier, because I don't want that to be lost in this. You aren't just some random. You two have done tremendous work especially in the area of immigration. So just for our audiences to remember, to keep note of that. Well then, what did you both see? What did you experience? What did you witness? I mean, I think people hear this in the news, but coming from first-hand experience, what was your experience there?
Well, you went first, so.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Derrlyn.
Well, the reason I wanted Bruce to go first was because he had tried to prepare me for my, when I went, because he went both times before I did, and he did. He gave me some background in terms of what to expect and how to prepare myself. But I don't think anything you could really say, even trying to share it now with people, it's just hard to describe, really, in my opinion. I mean, you realize, or at least for myself, you realize you're so close to the border, you're so close to the Rio Grande, you're so close to Ciudad Juarez, and all of that, maybe just over a hill, over mountains, and yet, I think you're still removed. I mean, for me, being born in the United States and having all these privileges of being able to, and freedom, to not feel like I would ever be living in fear or persecuted for the kinds of things that we've, I guess, allowed to happen in this country. It was a good experience to meet so many families, to really get to, hear their stories and their experiences. And also be, I guess, to some extent, one of the first welcoming faces to this country.
Well, okay. I guess I wanted to understand better what is actually going on. You hear a lot of stuff in the news. You can't necessarily believe what you hear. You certainly can't believe what the government's telling you. And even the news media doesn't really tell it like it is a lot of the time. So I really wanted to understand firsthand what was actually going on. You heard about the caravan and the thousands and thousands of people coming on the caravan and so on, which was being used, as a political tool, in this case by the Trump regime, to ratchet up, hatred against immigrants, the other part of his building, playing to his base and creating a much more xenophobic, white supremacist, hostile base against immigrants. And, and he was using it during the election, all those things. So I actually wanted to see what was going on. In fact, what's actually happening is much more complex, much more diverse, than is being portrayed on the media. It wasn't like people were coming up in caravans. People were a lot of the people that I talked to asked, they came up in family groups, but they end up meeting up in certain places, like in Chihuahua, okay, for example, and then coming in groups to El Paso. And they were, because this metering process, I don't know if you've heard that word metering, which is what they only open think of the door as just slightly ajar, only allowing a few people in, and yet there's a lot of people coming, right? So people didn't wait for their turn. They weren't going to stand in line for months on end, waiting to get a chance to make their asylum claim. And what they ended up doing in large numbers, in groups, was just basically going across the border, sitting down and waiting to be arrested. So it wasn't people trying to come into the country, sneak into the country, you might say. They were actually just up front trying to get in. Now that's a new phenomenon. I think the media has talked about that. It's historically single men, coming in by way of the border, coming across the border through the desert, often not making it, dying on the way. This new wave of immigrants, which I guess pretty much started in 2014, coming from Central America, are largely families, and they're coming because of very desperate conditions. But they've also realized that this is a better way for them to avoid a lot of the dangers by traveling together. Anyway, they're coming across, ICE is arresting them, treats them really, really badly. We can get into some of the particularities if people are interested in that. The kind of brutal, thuggish attitude that the ICE displays towards them, the way they're treated, ICE and the contractors that they hire and things like that. But because there's so many coming across, and because of the complicated political situation that exists right now, they allow them to leave detention. I mean, they're claiming that they don't have the facilities to handle everybody, and so they're just letting them go. And what this Annunciation House where we both of us worked, has been around a long time, has been helping immigrants for a long, long time, but all of a sudden there was this huge influx of people, and they had to step up to accommodate them. Okay, what I'm talking about, the Annunciation House, these are folks that are welcoming immigrants into this country, helping them, make their first steps towards connecting with their sponsors. I should mention that none of the people that are allowed to leave ICE unless they have a sponsor. Right. Okay. Who that sponsor is, that's, I think, my opinion, a controversial question, but or who those sponsors are. But anyway, those who have sponsors are allowed to leave, come into these shelters that we were working in, and it was our role as working in these shelters to welcome them there, help them, make them feel more like human beings, because ICE certainly doesn't, and then to help them make the connection to their sponsor, to make their transportation connection. So that was part of our role. It's very. I think the thing that Derrlyn was saying, it's very hard to explain because it's very, very complex. It sounds relatively simple, but all the different complications that come about when you're welcoming up families with children who've been on the road sometimes for months on end, at least for weeks. They come in ill. They come in, their possessions have been taken from them. There's just a million different things that happen. And logistical problems that come up, and you're constantly, working there. So, I guess we could talk about the working environment.
Yeah, I'd be curious about that.
Yeah.
Like, what actually does a day of work look like? Like, I know what it looks like for us on a school day, but when you were down there, like, getting up, like, what would one day look like for you?
Derrlyn, you want to talk about it?
Well, you'd wake up, in the morning, and I guess my day normally started around 6:30 or 7. And pretty much what you're doing is you're staying at the shelter and just waiting for drop-offs and buses from immigration, like they would just bring. And the way that it's organized in El Paso was amazing, because you'd always get a call to tell you this, this many people would be coming, 70 or 80, and this is always mothers, fathers, and children. I mean, like families.
Approximately how many a day would you say?
It could range. You could have 50 in a day to about 150.
All right.
So it's really dependent, and immigration or ICE, I mean, that's how you have to always just be on your toes and be ready and be prepared. They could send one bus, about 50, or one bus of just 20, but it was ongoing. It could start as, when I was there, the first time a bus came would be like 10 in the morning, which then you just process them. It was just a process to get in touch with their sponsor and everything. And the latest that a bus came was like about 11:30 at night.
Wow.
So it all depended.
So that you're working from that morning.
You're just constantly, and my day would just typically be starting in the morning. You'd have family or sponsors calling you when they had finally been able to purchase a ticket, either a bus ticket or a plane ticket, to say, this is the confirmation number, and because the families that were there overnight would always constantly ask, has my family called? Has my family called? So you're pretty much just on the phone most of the time in the morning, and then when the new families come in, and then you just have to work and get processing the new ones. So it just kind of overlaps. It just keeps going and going and going. And when you have a day when it just, they just keep coming, you have no time to really think, or, you're just always on the go. It's like, when you're in school and you're just constantly running around. But this one was just more, well, obviously it was way more intense, because, they, like Bruce said, they had nothing, they really didn't know the system. I mean, I had to just learn the process, the first day I got there. And you just have no time to really think about it. You're just constantly doing it. So by the end of the day, and then they had to be fed, clothed. There were all these different donations to make sure that they had, at least a clean pair of underwear and socks, and just things that, so that, like Bruce said, they began to feel like human again.
One thing that I was impressed with from the first day I was down there in El Paso in December, and the second time, is the amazing amount of volunteerism that's going on from the community. I mean, you think about it, El Paso is not a wealthy city like San Francisco is, but it's handling something like just the Annunciation House, which is only one of the groups of shelters, I don't know, is handling something like 3,000 a week, people a week. When you think about the amount of food, all the different meals that have to be prepared, and then transporting people to bus stations and plane and the airport. And a lot of the folks that we're talking about here, first of all, Spanish is often their second language. Okay. So your people who are coming into the country that, and especially the vast majority, especially the second time, were Guatemalans who were from the hilllands, from the countryside, from people working in small farms and so on. They're not much chance for education and so on. So there are people that come in and never been in an airplane, never used the internet or anything. And a lot of their relatives, the ones that we called, or the people that they contact their sponsors, also had difficulties along those lines. So it was very challenging. And it's pretty amazing that we were able to bring in that many people, help them, like Derrlyn was saying, get food and clothing and make their connections. A lot of people had to put a lot of energy and a lot of devotion into making sure that this happened. And a lot of credit goes to the people in El Paso. Just ordinary people. A lot of church groups came in, bringing food. Had made food. Would bring in meals for and you have to have 3 meals a day. So think about 3,000 people a day. I mean, I'm sorry, 3,000 people a week. Not just the one shelter. There's a whole group of shelters. Right? So the amount of money that it takes and so on, and the government's not doing anything to help that out. It's all being done by volunteers and by the community, by civil society.
Are these immigrants allowed to come into the country then once they request asylum, and then they are allowed to be here in this country, or are they in detention centers waiting and waiting and waiting, and many times now with the new ordinance told to wait in Mexico now? I've heard something like that on Democracy Now! Derrlyn, maybe you?
Yeah, no, I know that there's a number of them that are still waiting in Mexico. These are actually families that were actually released, you know. I mean,
Okay.
when ICE or immigration brings them to these shelters, they're bringing them and saying, okay, now, you know, our job is done, and otherwise, you know, they would just drop them off in the streets, and they would have no way of knowing what to do. There was one incident when that happened, and they would just drop them off somewhere, and then these two young women were just wandering around. They didn't know. So, you know, even as horrible as ICE is and Immigration and Border Patrol, that is one thing, you know, that they will bring them to these shelters. They do bring them there. And it is something that they are allowed to be in the country and actually get travel permission. I mean, I was really surprised that they could fly, you know, without any documentation, without any ID.
Yeah.
But, you know, with that being said, and then going to so many vast different areas of the country, it's places I've never been, you know, and then they are allowed. The thing is, though, what's insidious about it is because their biometrics are in the system. They're in the system now, and they have court dates. They all have to report to, you know, their court date, just like here in San Francisco. I mean, so many of them have to go to Montgomery Street, right, and report to their court date. And trying to explain to them, you know, why it was really, really important, and that they understand what this means. That they're not home free per se, but they are at least released. They're not in detention centers.
Right.
And that's why, you know, to just kind of regain their dignity and knowing that, you know, they are going to, you know, meet up with family, neighbors, friends, but someone, and hopefully, you know, start a new life.
So are most of these people then, they're seeking asylum? Is that what they're trying to do? And then the court date is to see whether they will be granted asylum. Is that right?
Well, the court date is the first thing that Derrlyn was referring to, is that they have to check in. And wherever they go, usually a couple days or 3 days after their date of arrival. And sometimes that was a problem, because if their transportation was delayed and they wouldn't get there on time, we would write letters for them and so. But anyway, a few days after their date of arrival, presumably they would then go to whatever the closest ICE place was. In some cases, they had to drive a considerable distance from where they were going. And I mean, ironic. I mean, when I came back from El Paso, I actually ran into 6 people down at the ICE office here in San Francisco that I had met in El Paso. So. Anyway, they come in, they check in, and then they're put in kind of the queue, which is that they'll be given a court date. I mean, I don't know exactly. You know, it could be a year from now, maybe 6 months from now. And then the question is, they need to get. And I was trying to emphasize with them as much as I could. You need to look for an attorney. You look for a community where you can get some help. Look for pro bono attorneys, because there are a lot of attorneys around. At least we're lucky in this area that there's a lot of that going on. Other parts of the country is probably much more difficult. But anyway, yeah, they get in line, and then they're going to be fighting their for their political asylum. You know, I mean, political asylum is based on fear of harm.
I was just going to ask
and there are
that,
a lot of people that fear and I've heard particularly stories about that. But there are a lot of people who just come in because they have no future at the economy, or global warming is destroying the farming infrastructure, whatever, making it impossible for them to live on the crops that they grow. So, to me, that is a legitimate claim for asylum, right? Even though that legally is not, right? Legally, so they have to come up with something that will satisfying a judge, you know, and the requirements and stuff like that. So, yeah. So, but in terms of the question here, which I still have a lot of questions about what's going on, even though I've been there for like, you know, almost a month. One of the things, I don't know what happens to the people who don't have a sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I don't know what happens to the single men that don't come with a family. And I have not been able to find out from anybody. I've asked a lot of people, and I still don't know what the answer to that is. And we working in the shelters don't necessarily have that answer.
Because they don't necessarily come through your Annunciation House?
The Annunciation House?
Annunciation.
Yeah, Annunciation House. The only people that we saw, I don't think there's a single women's shelter, but the ones that we saw, they were all families.
Okay.
Okay, which meant, like Derrlyn said, either a man with a child or a woman with a child.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
And could you describe, so for a given family, I don't know if there's a typical, what would their experience be once they were dropped off at this Annunciation?
Which is a shelter. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what would their experience be? Are they going to be there for days? Maybe there's no typical experience, but can you describe what they might go through in your hands, basically?
It all depended on when you would try and contact their sponsor, their families. Because like Bruce was saying, sometimes even for their family members, it was really hard for them to understand that we needed them to buy the ticket, basically online, where they were, and send us a confirmation number, so that when we dropped off these families at the bus station or the airport, tickets were already bought. So then, I mean, so it was really complicated, and and most often, if they couldn't afford a plane ticket, then the bus was the only other way for them to get around. So they could spend maybe overnight, and then the next day they would, the family would have done that, or they could have stayed for longer. They could have stayed 2 or 3 days, 4 days. Yeah, it all depended on that other end.
The sponsor end.
Yes, whether they, and I mean, I had a couple of conversations with families that said that it would take them time because they just didn't have the money at that time.
And you're talking about you had to wait for the sponsor family
Right,
to come up with that.
come up with the money. So they come up with buying the ticket. Most often it was a bus ticket, like a Greyhound, and if they could afford to get them to fly. Because in many ways, if you have like a mother with 2 teenage sons and you have to buy 3 tickets, I mean, even though it's only one way, it's a lot. And there would be situations like that. And so they realized, but yeah, I mean, it's amazing because taking the bus could take 3-4 days, just to get to their destination.
And I'm curious, in Mexico, I travel by bus to go to other states. And I remember seeing many times, especially down south, where Mexican immigration, would get on the bus and recognize your accent and immediately pull you off, even if you had proper documentation. I have witnessed this, where they have pulled Guatemaltecos, Hondureños off, and as much as they scream or cry, what we say or doesn't matter because the military is there on the side. So the discrimination that is experienced in Mexico, and then thinking in the USA, if they're going, you said too many parts in the USA, and if they're not sanctuary cities, and if they're in the Midwest or they're down south, what experience could they be going through if you're going on the bus and you might encounter some people that are anti-immigration, immigrant?
No, it's true.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't heard anything in terms of anything negative in that way, but I don't know if I'd be privy to information like that, to really be honest. But I thought about that a lot too, without even speaking a word of English.
Exactly.
And then getting on a bus. And
being
then
so obvious.
Right, and any bus driver who has, I mean, it's frightful. It's definitely really frightful.
But you don't necessarily, so once you've made that communication with the sponsor, and the sponsor has procured the ticket in whatever form, then that's really the last you're going to hear about it. Is there ever a point where you're supposed to follow up with the sponsor? Did they arrive, or is that not part of the process?
Well, when I was there the first time, there was a woman by the name of Anna Portas, and I don't know if you ever met Anna. Anyway, Portuguese, Brazilian woman. Anyway, we, I was talking to her one day and we said, we had to try to figure out, So we did call up. We spent a couple hours calling up people and, did they make it on there?
Yeah.
Did they, because we give them, they're provided with food. Okay. So we try to estimate how long it's going to be.
Right.
They're going to be on the bus, and then how many sandwiches and so. They're all peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Right.
But anyway, it's something to keep you going. But and the little bit that we did, it seemed to be. They said no, everything's fine. So I didn't do that. But I'm sure that there's all kinds of issues, all kinds of problems that people encounter along the way. But in terms of what you were saying about the documents, those documents that they're given, we came to understand, those documents are very powerful. When they're coming directly from ICE, they have their pictures, they have their sponsor. As long as they're going to where those documents indicate they should be going, we have not heard of anybody, those documents not being honored. We go to the airport, we show it to security, they honor those documents. They bring in a special person, that works for the airlines and looks it over to make sure everything's kosher, I guess. But as far as I know, and we were working with people who've been there a long time, we had not heard of anybody being denied travel or anything like that based when they have those documents with them.
But what you're suggesting, Derrlyn, is it's a double-edged sword, kind of like DACA, where it's a powerful tool to allow you to, but the government knows where you are.
Right. Oh yeah, no, they know exactly.
Not only do they know where you are, but you may be going to somebody's home who they don't know who they are. And I had conversations like that too, and it dawned on me, I hadn't thought of it. Somebody's going to their brother, and the brother had come across the border, and the authorities didn't have their, So I thought of that as well as one of the advantages for the government in doing this. So I just think there's a lot of things going on that I still don't know in terms of what's really going on. And I could give you some speculations.
We'll talk. So what was maybe the most surprising thing that you experienced, or the thing that was most illuminating? Because both of you have been dealing with immigration issues for all the time I've known you, and beyond that, which is decades. So was there anything out of this that was new for you, that gave you a new insight into anything?
I think it's what Bruce had said earlier. What really is highlighted or really stays with me is the amazing volunteer group. They are amazing. And then when you think of how many different shelters there were in El Paso, they all needed volunteers in whatever capacity. And the few of us who came from out of town or out of state, and then again that's why our typical day was so intense. We were there for that reason. We weren't there for any other reason. But these are people who had daily lives like we have here, and yet they would spend a whole day or a few hours just doing this work, and it's intense work. So instead of going home, and relaxing and having a glass of wine or going to a movie, they're actually at these shelters doing what they do. And I just think it's just so amazing. I met some incredible people, like Bruce was saying, who are actually from that community, from that city, and it was inspiring. It really was. And you realized that everybody had a part. Everybody shared, a role in what was going on, and what, in order to really say yes, these families are going to be reunited with their families or reunited with loved ones. Everybody had a role in that. Everybody, can and should take credit for the work that they did.
I have to say that, and some people were cracking up when I was telling them that. But if you would have asked me about Texas, we all have our own narrowness in our lives. We have ideas that don't correspond to reality. But anyway, if you would ask me about Texas, I would say, no, I don't want to go down there. All a bunch of rednecks. That is not El Paso at all. And I really like El Paso, and I like the people at El Paso.
How is El Paso?
Huh?
How is it?
Well, like I said, it's not a wealthy town. It's kind of like I don't know. The only way I kind of described it in my own mind was like L.A. in the '50s or something. I mean, it's not glitzy at all. It's dry, it's flat, and not a lot of tall buildings and so on. But the people are really, really nice people. I mean, I mean, maybe that sounds hyperbole, but I really, everywhere we went, when we meet people in the restaurant, I had a chance, to get out a little bit more than I think Derrlyn did, but in the restaurants or in other situations, I really like them. And they're not at all like, Trump is not a popular person there. Mm-hmm. It's 80% Latino, by the way. Mm-hmm. Okay, almost everybody's
That's what I was going to
bilingual.
ask. What's the makeup of the city?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's a bilingual city.
Yeah.
Okay.
Beto O'Rourke is from there.
Yeah, Beto O'Rourke is from there. He's very popular among a lot of people. But and his politics comes from, I think, from whatever else he may think, he is pretty good around the question of immigration. He's got a pretty enlightened view of that. And I think that comes from, and I don't think that's untypical of the people in El Paso. Mm-hmm. So people in El Paso are not big on the wall. They feel insulted that Trump talks about how it's such a violent place till the wall went up. Everybody I talked to said that's just not true. There is a lot of violence in Juarez and so on, but it's kind of like here, we're in the Mission District, and I remember years ago when I would say I'd be in the Mission District, people would be aghast, like, wow, how many guns do you carry with you?
Right.
I mean, that kind of thing. People have this idea in their mind, and like I have this idea in Texas, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
Is there anything for people who haven't even been down there? What message what thing would you want to tell them about your experience for somebody who hasn't done something like this, or is concerned about what's happening with what we're doing with immigrants in terms of how we've been treating them and things like that? Is there anything you'd want to tell those people about what's going on down in El Paso?
Well, I've been speaking a lot about this, and I've been writing about it too, so I just want to say it real quickly. There's more than meets the eye here, and I really believe, like when I use the word duplicitous, the Trump administration is, look, immigrants are being used as a scapegoat. We know that, right? Trump is using them as a way to rally his white supremacist base. White supremacy, is his cup of tea, and that's, dividing people up. I mean, that's not just Trump. This is the history of this country. Is you need to divide people, right? And immigrants right now is the main way in which these divisions are being promoted. Okay, so that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that immigrants are becoming increasingly important for the whole functioning of the society and its economy. And I do believe, although I don't, I can't give you all the evidence. I can give you some anecdotal kind of evidence, but I do believe that this wave of immigrants is coming in while they are mainly coming because they can't survive in their own country or their conditions of life are very precarious. There is also a certain amount of recruitment going on. I compared it, one of the things I wrote to the Bracero program, but it's, unlike the Bracero program, at least the Braceros
Can you
were
see what the
doing
Bracero program is?
Okay, the Bracero program was in World War II, when there was a shortage of labor, and Mexicans were recruited in large numbers to come up here and work in the railroads and work primarily in the railroads and in the fields. And they performed a service that they have never been credited for. And most of the people don't even know about them, But to me, this is kind of like an unofficial Bracero program, but they're not even given credit for the fact that they're here. They're going to be doing a lot of these important jobs. So, I think that's one of the things that's going on. It's not being spoken about at all. Mm-hmm. So it kind of contradicts Trump's propaganda. So I think he's playing a double game. They're all playing a double game. They've always been playing a double game.
And you're saying that, I can see with unemployment being low, and wanting to have essentially an extra pool of labor to keep wages from being, pressure for wages to go up. And then having their information basically means you're here until it's fine, but then when we don't need you anymore, we're sending you back.
That's it.
Because that's what the Bracero really was about. It was
That's
like,
right.
we'll use you until we need you, as long as we need you, and then we have your information, we're sending you back. Because that was the thing that I think characterized part of the Bracero program back in the day. It was very much okay, now we need you, now we don't. So these people are being really used, and they're being used against other workers to keep all of our conditions low in terms of wages and things like that.
And you know, the Washington Post published a map the other day, which was based on statistics that they got from the Annunciation House. It was just a statistical, you know, a thumbnail, right? It wasn't all of them, but then and they actually do a pretty good job of accounting for who's coming, where they're going, and so they did a map. I can send it to you, but it shows where I think there were 1,500, you know, the sampling. And if you look at it, the largest groups were going to southern Florida and around the Houston area. Think about what's happened in the last couple of years.
I don't know.
Hurricanes and huge damage.
Right.
And think about Katrina, and you know that story too as well.
So
about,
the rebuilding of those cities with
I
immigrant
think
labor,
contractors
basically.
are looking for
Right.
some folks to do some cheap labor for them.
That makes sense.
You know, and Immokalee tomatoes. I mean, if people know about that situation in Immokalee, I mean, they recruit people. There was slave labor going on there. I mean, you're actually talking about people who are in a position to be practically enslaved because their conditions are so shaky, right, with this asylum business and so on. So anyway, yeah, that's what I think.
Derrlyn, you're a public high school teacher. What are the conversations like around immigration at
With
your
my
school?
students?
Yes.
Yeah, that was, I guess, my take-home message, or my bringing back message, more with them. You know, and I told them, all my students, whether they're, you know, native born like I am here, they're born here or not, that I met so many young teenage, especially teenage boys, few young women, young girls, but, and when I would tell these families and these young men and women who just arrived that I was a school teacher, I mean, you could tell that for them, that was an opportunity they never had in their home country, or that was very precarious. So we would talk about that. And then there are a couple of times, even when I would have only a few minutes, or, you know, in the morning, like a half an hour, I would have a group of them just, you know, around, like, you know, where we would have our meals, just come at a table so that I could teach them English. So we would learn English together, or they would learn English, and I would be able to. So my message back to my students was, you know, I have a very large classroom, and I'm lucky if half of it is filled with students, you know, and there's reasons, right? If they drop out or they just don't come to school, and whatever reasons there are. I mean, we're in a big urban city with so many other tempting things to do. But I said, this whole class should be filled with students. And I met, all of the ones I met down in El Paso, that's the first thing they said to me, is they want to go to school. You know, and to be able to come here and realize that part of that is the education, you know, that they, you know, they've dreamed of and they've wanted. I mean, Bruce has a great point about the labor, you know, but there are so many young, and so my hope is in them. My hope is, you know, that they will help to really change all of this, so we don't have to keep repeating this history, you know, of just bringing in indentured servitude and, you know, families like that. That's where I want to put my energy, is just trying to make sure this is something that, you know, empowers them in that way.
And I think, like, there's been this whole red wave, teacher strikes and things like that. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I have a dream, basically, that because there's going to become a time when the economy is going to go down again, and this group is going to be scapegoated, and they're not going to be needed in the way that you're talked about, and they're going to be like, we're going to round them up and we're sending them back. That will be very important for teachers to take a stand there and to say no. Like, that will be the moment, because that's where, and if we don't do that, then we fall again. We will take another step back for our class, for our cause. If we do not defend it, it's not just the right thing to do. We have to see it as life and death for the possibility of solidarity across national lines. So I hope in the time that the red wave does not ultimately just become about ourselves, but about all of us who are fighting to keep education, because public education is a right for everyone. I mean, and that'll be a big test for that movement at that point.
But it is really generational, right? Intergenerational, God, what a word. To kind of be able to, and like you said earlier, Eduardo, all of us, I mean, all four of us together, I mean, the years, the decades of this cause, of having immigration policies or what have you, I mean, that allows people to live in dignity, that allows people to live in freedom and peace. I mean, it always bothers me that, why is that such a threat to me? I mean, why would that be a threat to me? If people want to live in dignity and have their own livelihood and, be able to provide for their families. I mean, suddenly that becomes a threat, and I don't know why. But I think it is important to always instill, in whatever way I can, because even when I told my students that I was going to the border, they were very happy, I guess, or very, excited. In fact, one, Theo, one of the first questions he asked when I got back is, just to say it in a few words, what it was like for you to be there. Do you remember that? And it was interesting because the only thing I could think of in the top of my head is, I want to go back. And he goes, good answer. So, I hope that, it's something that will somehow be passed on, and it's not, and it becomes something that, younger people will feel like this is the right thing to do as well. That's the hope.
Just one more thing I'd like to add there, and that is that we've had this experience in California, and when I talk about this, and we talk about California as it's not Trump country, generally speaking, right? California is not openly xenophobic towards immigrants in the way that other states are, but we still have kind of an apartheid system here, right? Okay, but there's a change in demographics in the country, which is the other side of the coin, right? Which is what the Trump is really playing on and his base, this idea that the domination of the white race and so on in this country, which historical situation that is being challenged, and that's a lot of the basis on which the anti-immigrant situation is being whipped up. But it's a very contradictory situation, right? And I just just like, for example, when Trump talked about closing the border, I was kind of thinking, well, go for it, man. Because it's going to reveal just how deeply dependent U.S. is on Mexico, right? Which is something they don't really want to talk about, So anyway, I think that's a real weakness within the empire that has great potential for potentially positive change. I think this whole issue. Anyway, I think because white supremacy is such a ideologically, it's such a foundation for capitalism in this country. It was founded on white supremacy, on slavery and genocide and so on, and it really can't function without that. And so I think that's really important struggle. So I think what you were saying about people coming to the aid of immigrants, it's not only just a good moral thing to do, but in terms of creating a different kind of world. It's one of the key things, and they really, the powers that be recognize that.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah, which is why they want the divide.
Yeah.
Now, I've only seen the headlines on this, and this is sort of a smaller thing, but I am curious. There's been this shakeup in ICE.
Right.
People have been either, I can't tell whether they've been getting kicked out or they're resigning. Do you have any sense of what's going on there? Why this is happening right now? Like, why are these people getting kicked out, or are they resigning? What's going on there?
Well, there's a big contradiction here that there are more people coming in right now. Even Trump has to admit it. The media is talking about this. The biggest wave of immigrants since November in the last dozen years. And this is Trump,
Mhm.
you know? And Trump made his whole thing about he's going to stop,
Right.
build a border wall and he's going to stop them. I mean, again, I have my own kind of thinking about that really the economy is what
Deciding what's going on here.
and he can't totally change that either, and so it's a double game. So I don't know now who's he going to blame it on? It's not going to be him. He's the tough guy. It's these underlings that are not doing the job that they should be doing. I don't know.
Scapegoats. A different set of scapegoats.
I think
essentially.
so. I mean, that's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Trump, and I want to make sure that we hold Obama as well as accountable, as he was namely called, notoriously called the porter of chief amongst the immigrant activists. Is this something that both of you can say something about the Democrats and Republicans? How this is just not just the Republican. This is also something we have to look at the Democratic Party for how immigrants are being really demonized in this country. I'm not sure if one of you can say something about this, not just the Republicans.
Well, I used to say that there was no microscope invented that is powerful enough to detect the difference between Republicans and Democrats when it comes to immigration. Okay, I think Trump has slightly changed that because he's overtly using immigration as a way to whip up. I mean, overtly and publicly and without any, like they say in Spanish, pelos en la lengua.
Sí.
Just try to,
If we should translate, it's a very good expression.
Yeah. It's like, what is it? How do you, anyway.
Hair in your tongue.
Yeah, right. Hair in your tongue. But I mean,
What's the
I
best
don't know. I
translation?
have no
It's just
idea.
like,
I mean, I know
US
what
American
it means.
audience
bald
to
face,
I don't know.
boldly
Yeah.
declaring his, whatever.
In your face, no?
Yeah, in your
Okay.
face, in your face. Okay, so.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, look, the wall was built by Clinton. Okay.
Uh-huh.
They had the debates, but neither one of them wanted to bring that up because Trump is trying to portray himself as the tough on immigration, and Clinton at that particular time was trying to claim that she was like, the great
Counterweight to that.
counterweight to that, right? So it's all hypocrisy, and like you said, what Obama did and so on. And even the Democrats now. I mean, what are they doing in regard to this thing? Yeah, they're against the wall, they say, because whatever. They want to make it look like Trump is the bad guy in terms of immigration, and he is in a lot of ways. But they themselves aren't coming out. They're not coming out and saying, look, our economy depends on immigrants coming over here, and we should welcome them. Some of them are. There are a few, there was the governor of Washington, I think, when Trump threatened. He said, yeah, we welcome them.
Right.
They're part of our society. There are some good people out there on that term, politicians, but on the higher national level, and especially the ones that are going to be considered to be the real candidates against Trump, they're going to be very careful about how they put this out there because they are as much for keeping the white supremacist system going as anybody. They're just going to go about it a different way, And anyway, I guess is that too harsh? I don't.
No. I don't think we're too harsh about capitalism here.
No, not at all.
Do you want to add anything?
No, I think that's good. I mean, I just feel like we just have to be vigilant. I mean, the idea that, since I became a teacher and then California with 187, and just the idea that you just have to continue this vigilance. And no matter who it is, I mean, I think we got a little complacent with Obama, just thinking it was going to be different.
Yeah.
And then it did. It just kind of, we got bit in the ass, with that. So I just think we just always, whether it's overt or covert, it's something we just all have to be really, always, remind ourselves that, these are people. These are people who deserve the right to live the life they want.
And we'll end on this because I think one of the things we've talked about, and sometimes teachers forget this, is that we're workers. And as workers, what would you wish that we as workers, we have fellow workers coming across the border trying to get work themselves, what would you wish to see happen that would make you feel like we're beginning to make a difference? What will it look like when that's happening?
Well, work is coming, or families coming, or young teens, or unaccompanied minors, whatever it is. I mean, we should have no borders. That's it. Period. Wherever the work is, wherever people can find whatever they're looking for. I mean, it's just absolutely why do we need these borders? These artificial, arbitrary, random borders, and then to kind of claim a state that this is mine and you have nothing to do with it. It makes no sense. Again, like I said, it just makes no sense to me, at all that we have these borders. So, yeah, welcome. I mean, welcome. Just to say, bienvenidos.
And here's another thing: neither the Democrats or Republicans are ever going to talk about publicly in their media spokespeople. That the U.S. has absolutely no respect for anybody's borders and never has.
Right.
And it's the U.S. is primarily responsible in the world, among all the powers of the world, bears more responsibility for the immigration, what they call the immigration crisis, and so
Also in Europe, with our war in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan. And,
right,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
Palestine.
I mean,
Thank you for
I
saying
really
that.
believe that in terms of responsibility, that we should be we really need a massive movement. It's, there is a significant number of people out there that are doing different things. Like, you don't see it so much, but on the border, for example, and there's other organizations and stuff. They're working hard to try to do things, but we really need a much more visible public expression of protest, determined protest around this, that we're not going to put up with this, anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Derrlyn. Thanks, Bruce.
It's a school
Thanks
night.
for having us
Thank
here.
you.
We just spoke with Derrlyn. We just spoke with Derrlyn Tom, longtime immigration activist and public school educator, and Bruce Neuburger, author and longtime labor activist as well.
And teacher at City College, or, was it?
Ex-teacher.
Yeah.
Retired.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo and Andy.
For our
sorry.
audience, just give us a second, don't just leave. Yes, for our audience, you can find, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with all. You can find us on BitChute, Google Play, iTunes, YouTube, and Stitcher.
Wow.
Yes.
And next week, I think we'll be talking about Algeria, Sudan. What do you
Wow.
call
What
it?
is happening in Africa?
Yeah.
And
The-
maybe in African Spring.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
didn't mention NSA TV.
And that's it.
Thank
You see,
you
we're
all.
being watched.
Yes.
Thank you very much. All right, we will see
All right,
our
take
audience
care.
next week.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.